Hi everyone, Sajid Amit here, and welcome to my review of the Campfire Bonneville. Okay, the Bonnevilles are a part of the chromatic series that Campfire has recently come out with, and of course, Campfire is not any sort of new kid on the block. They have been around in the hobby forever, and a lot of you might have experienced your first taste of the more flagship type IM, especially in the $1,000 range, with the Campfire Andromeda. I know I did. A lot of people I know, in fact, sort of graduate from, let's say, the HT600s to a Campfire Andromeda, especially when they want to experience IM. So this is a company with a lot of prestige, if I may say. So the Chromatic series is an interesting series they've come out with, of which the Campfire Bonneville is supposed to be the flagship. The series is typified by colorful aesthetics and, of course, colorful tunings. Now, this is, like I said, the flagship of the Chromatic series. It's a 4-driver hybrid. I will very quickly take you guys through the sort of very minimal unboxing experience that I have with me. Of course, you can get a more maximal unboxing experience by choosing for a higher end, more luxurious leather bag and all that. So they give you that sort of option, which I appreciate. So you can get two kinds of unboxing depending on how much money you pay. I think the differential is about $200. So this is the more minimal cardboard box that it comes with. It's called Bonneville, which, it sounds like the name of a chocolate maker. And it does even look like a box of chocolates. This purple shade is just beautiful. I love the lettering here, the font here. It says sensational sound. There's something very retro and artistic and creative about this, right? And I really like it. It talks about, how this has 1 BA for mids. This talks about how this has 2 BAs for highs, etc. Very nice. Portland, Oregon, established 2015. So I really dig this sort of, design work, the colorway. Inside you have the very famous mesh pouches that Campfire Audio does provide with most of their IMs, and a lot of people will just buy this from the Campfire Audio or the LO Audio website and just use it to keep their IM safe. You get this mesh bag, and I have the flat cable that it comes with inside this bag. So I got the 4.4 mm cable, which has the nice purple accents. This bag is handy, of course, and it has a string with it, which, I'm sort of, and then it has a cleaning cloth. This has extra set of tips here. So it's pretty basic, and I think this also has a cleaning tool if that matters to you. So the unboxing is what it is. It's somewhat basic, but it's fine, and it keeps the weight light. So if you're shipping internationally, I think that's wonderful. So I'm currently pairing it with the Pentagon tips, the Pentagon brass tips from Courier. So I'll talk about what these tips sound like. And I did a lot of tip rolling with this IM, guys, and I settled on these tips as the best sounding tips ever. And I think these tips elevate the sound of these IMs to such a wonderful level. And I'm using the SEMA Acoustics cable. I'll leave a link to this cable. I do think this cable is incredible value for money nowadays, given the fact that if you do care about aesthetics, this has some of the best aesthetics around. This jack is wonderful. The splitter is very nice. And these connectors are great too. So, yeah, I love these cables. I'm not someone who doesn't buy high-end cables. If you've seen my video roster, you'll see that I've reviewed the Orpheus, the $6,000 PW Orpheus, and I have a review of the Campfire, the Centurion forthcoming. So, I'm someone who does appreciate really expensive cables, but this, I think, is good enough for most people, and it's certainly good enough for me as well. The SEMA Acoustics cables, I don't get a discount from them by any means. I just bought this with my own money, but I think these are wonderful cables. Okay, moving on. So you know about the unboxing, you know about a bit of the history of Campfire, which you might have known already. So these have a newly designed dual magnet 10 mm dynamic driver for bass, a custom balanced armature for mid-range, and dual balanced armatures for treble. It has a sensitivity rating of 94 dB, an impedance of 29 ohms. Now, to talk about sort of the elephant in the room, what is its bass like? Because a lot of people are disagreeing about its bass quantity, not so much about its bass quality, because most people do agree that it has some of the best bass you can get at this price point of $1,400. Let me just quickly say that I wasn't able to find a frequency response for this IM, or at least one that's reliable. I found one on Squigling. It was done by someone, I think, who has access to very basic tools, and I think his measurement rig suffers from couple response. So I'm not going to put too much stock in the frequency response charts available on the internet. So keep that in mind, guys. You will run into a lot of different charts. They might look the same, but on closer inspection, you might see that the balance of the treble even though it's shaped the same in the treble, like let's say for example you see a graph, and I talked about this with a bunch of other IMs in the past, especially the Noble Audio Sultan. If you check out my review of Noble Audio Sultan, in there I have dropped 2 charts which have the same looking, a very similar sort of look to the charts. But if you compare closely, you'll see that on balance, one of the charts has relatively more bass compared to treble than the other chart. So that relation, that ratio, that comparison between bass and treble is important because that's how your ears will perceive it. Okay. So, this is not bass light. I think it has a solid bass foundation that can be accentuated with tip rolling. And I will talk more about tip rolling before I conclude the video. The bass quality is its forte. It's incredible. And what I really like about his bass is that because a lot of manufacturers are spoiled by Harman's sort of, very lackadaisical approach to one tuning fits all approach, they will have this enormous sub bass shelf and just carve out the mid bass, which makes these IMs sound wonderful at first blush because sub bass gives you that kick drum depth and all that. But then once you are deprived of mid bass, I think overall what happens is you do get at some point fatigued by the dryness in the lower mids, and you do get the bass starts to become more one note. Once you've experienced this sort of bass and you wrap your mind around this sort of bass, which does combine sub bass with mid bass well, which is easier said than done, guys, you'll understand that this is actually very artistic and artful tuning. The bass quality is high. The decay is neither too fast nor too slow. Coming to mid-range, the mid-range I really liked on this. I played a whole bunch of tracks on this, guys. I like vocals. Not typically male vocal or female vocal kind of stuff. For example, I like Hetfield's growls, right? James Hetfield of Metallica. I like Chris Cornell. He sounds very different from Hetfield. He sounds melancholic. He's got a more airy voice, and sometimes he can even sound more chesty. I like Eddie Vedder, who definitely has a deep voice. I like Mustaine, who doesn't, from Megadeth, Dave Mustaine, who does not have a deep voice, who has somewhat of a very a shrill voice. Not shrill is not the right word, a thinner voice, right? Among female vocalists, I played Alanis Morissette, Patricia Barber. All of these artists sounded excellent. The mid-range here is excellent. Very accurate, lifelike, and extremely nuanced. In mid-range, one thing that typifies the mid-range of the Campfire Bonneville is the amount of inflections and microdynamics you get from vocals. I just love it for that reason alone. And then coming to treble, the treble is really, really nice. Like I said, don't look at the only graph that's available on the internet because it doesn't sound like that graph. I'm not saying that's the only graph that's possible to, draw off this from the measurement rig, but that it doesn't sound like that graph. So ignore that graph on the internet. Try it at a store or at a meet if you can. The treble is solid. It does have a bit of sparkle, but I do think you can. It's not fatiguing for me, and I don't think it'll be fatiguing for you. Moving on to technical performance, like I said, I get solid microdynamics and I get solid macrodynamics. And one of the ways in which you can test for macrodynamics is by simply looking at how often you're turning or down the volume, right? Because what happens is you arrive at a certain level of volume on your DAP, for example, and then let's say you're playing a song and all of a sudden the song becomes loud, even at the same volume. So that's just goes to show how dynamic or contrast or punchy these IMs are. And these are very dynamic and contrasty and punchy. So it is very wonderfully macrodynamic as well. I do want to talk about the space because it does have a wonderful soundstage that's deep. And the depth, I think, is a standout feature of this IM. It's very deep sounding and layered sounding. And the depth is partially a result of the fact that the upper mids are not very protruding. But I do think there's something going on with the overall, way in which this IM has been designed, because it does create for a very cavernous soundstage, guys. And I love the soundstage for this. It generously splatters images across the soundscape. And when I say splatters, I don't mean to make it sound messy. It generously positions images all across the soundscape, which is just delightful. So it is a delightful IM that I think can appeal to a large audience with the right tips, guys. Tips are critical for this, and I will talk about tips. The source is critical for this. So when I play this off my Sony DAP, it sounds marvelous, and I do have to say there was a bit of a burn-in for this, which I did think opened up the stage a bit more and made the bass tighter. So I use my Sony DAP for the most part, and songs I played are pretty evident from, if you can read this, include Save Me from Amy Mann, which is a wonderful female vocal track. I played a bit of Deftones, Linkin Park, Queensryche, Some Faith No More tracks. So I do like rock and metal, as some of you might know. Some GNR, some Tool, etc. And Anthrax. Keep It in the Family was a lot of fun with this. Okay, so guys, tips are where it's at with this IM. So I tried this with so many tips. I have left a link to my more elaborate rendition of adventures with tip rolling with this IM, and I'll leave a link to that sort of Head5 post in the description section of this video. So do check that out. So I've tried a bunch of tips with this, right? Including the Divinus Velvets, the Ear Tune Fidelity, Elatec Baroque tips, the Pentacon Courier Brass tips. I mean, you name it, I've tried it. So I've even tried the JVC Spiral Dots, the Final Type E tips, the orange ones, the SpinFit 240, which you see over here, double flange ones, and generic Chinese tips, which can often sound fantastic, and they do with the Bonneville. So these generic Chinese tips are also pretty spectacular, I think. They get shipped with the Aroma Audio Jewel, and I think they add a lot of heft in the bass. Okay, very quickly about the tips. The Elatec Baroque tips do involve a slight mid-bass enhancement plus vocal forwardness, but it does become ever so slightly busier because of this sort of mid-bass enhancement and the vocal forwardness. The Ear Tune tips are interesting. These are these sorts of oval-shaped tips, right? The Ear Tune tips push the vocals back further compared to the Elatec and give you a tighter bass, and they're fun, I think. And you do get more vocal inflections with these tips. And I think faster transients. Now, my favorite Pentacon Courier brass tips are Courier Pentacon brass tips. I'm sorry, I think these are Pentacon Courier brass tips. Anyway, they push vocals further back compared to the Elatec, which is great. The stage is pushed back, so it does create a sense of more holography. It is a wider stage and a more precise imaging, and I do think by far the tightest bass. So when you have some mid bass, there is a concern that is the bass tight, so that is not a concern anymore with these tips. So it does make for a very tight bass, a wonderful pairing. It definitely makes the biggest difference, and I think the most exciting of all the tips that I've tried. So that's worth keeping in mind. The Divinus Velvets, which are supremely comfortable, which I have over here. I mean, these are nice. They make the acoustic guitar and vocals, the star of the show. You get more mid-range focus, less air, but very decent all-rounder tips with substantial bass impact. So Divinus Velvets are interesting if that's, if you like acoustic guitars and vocals. The Final Type E tips, which I don't have right now. I mean, I do, but they're sort of paired with my Campfire Supermoon, and that review is forthcoming. These are the orange Type E tips that I bought from Singapore. I mean, they are generally very bassy, but with these IMs, they have the effect of lessening the bass impact and treble. But overall, it's just a more fun and cloudier and presentation. I would say it's more musical and safer, I dare say. The SpinFit's double flange, which some of you might not like because they might be a bit intrusive for a lot of you, have a warmer presentation. And I do think they mask the details somewhat, but they're coherent and excellent in general. And JVC Spiral Dots, which a lot of you might like or might not like, which I have over here, the JVC Spiral Dots. They're bassy, but these have a treble spike somewhere. And I already talked about the Chi-Fi tips, which are just fantastic, guys. Overall, what is evident is that these IMs are very susceptible, especially in terms of how tightly the bass is replayed, or how smoothly the treble is replayed by your choice of tips, and of course your ear anatomy. So that's it, guys. These are remarkable for $1,400 because they're more resolving than most IMs in the $1,400 range. They're more cavernous in soundstage than most IMs in the $1,400 range. They have a wider soundstage. Very sweet sounding overall balance across the frequency spectrum. You'll not get a Harman shout. So they're not very in your face with the upper mids. They're not very shrill with the treble, but they're not dark in the treble either. You do get mid bass. That is one defining feature of these IMs. You do get mid bass. So if you're not someone who's used to mid bass, because all you have listened to are the Moondrop variations and those sorts of dry leaning stuff that some of the reviewers are, trumpeting because that's what Harman wants you to like. I mean, obviously I jest with my choice of expressions. I don't take all of these things that I'm saying seriously. But I mean, what is serious though is I don't, as you have known if you followed my work, you need to be open-minded to colorful tunings. And this is somewhat of a colorful tuning, but it's fantastic. It works. I mean, this is $1,400, guys. I do like it more than most IMs in that price range. It's, I think I prefer to the Symphonium Helios, which is slightly less expensive. I'm not going to compare this to the Campfire Supermoon because that will get its own video. But it is, I think, more preferable to the Sennheiser IE900 because it's not as thin sounding or as aggressive in the treble. I would prefer to the Sony IER Z1R only slightly because of the fact that it's easier to fit in your ears and it's less heavy. And I do think the treble is overall better managed. The IER Z1R can have a peaky treble if you don't get the fit right. And the mid-range here is certainly wetter and more soulful, let's say, than the Z1R mid-range, which I find lacking in emotions. So, wonderful IMs, great job Campfire, and I recommend this strongly. But as always, I advise that you try to audition them before buying. And these, my opinions, are just one person's opinion, one guy on the internet sharing his views. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye-bye.